Hi, my name is Roy Collin, and welcome to the show. I've also got five podcasts: the Awakening Podcast, exposing fraud and corruption, but with solutions; the Crypto Podcast, talking about all things blockchain, NFTs, crypto; the Meditation Podcast, talking about all different types of meditation, but there's also meditations there from 1 minute to 2 hours. And the other one's the Learn Polish Podcast. So if you're interested in learning Polish, you can do that. And the other one is Speaking with Roy Collin. And I just have guests from around the world talking about either public speaking or also about their book or just general life in general. And you'll find everything on bio.link/podcaster. I'm also a podcasting coach. And you see the QR code there, and it's also on my link as well. And if you're interested in actually going on some podcast shows, I'm helping people doing that. Or if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com. He helps people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. So be sure to check him out, DanielPacker.com. I hope you enjoy this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest today, he's the author of over 100 books. Yeah, I didn't make a mistake there. It's actually, I don't know. We're going to find out. 100 books. He's an entrepreneur, a hypnotist, and a coach. Please welcome George Hutton. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect, Roy. Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is George Hutton. I'm the owner of persuasion.com. We've been making books and courses and programs to help people become more persuasive, to become better communicators, and to gain more self-esteem so they can more easily go after what it is they want in life. I've been writing books, as Roy mentioned, for the last probably 10 years. I started with my first work of fiction maybe about 10 years ago. And after that, I've been just writing fiction and nonfiction as a kind of part of my daily routine. And so I just love to help people. I love to coach people. One thing I learned about myself a long time ago when I was a teacher is I love to watch the process of people going through the experience of thinking they can't do something and then realizing they can do something and finding out that they have this whole new level of skills that they didn't know existed before. I just like to watch that happen. So in my business, we try to do that with as many people as we possibly can in whatever way that we can. So that's kind of my purpose in life right now, is to help spread techniques and strategies and ideas that will help people just do better in whatever they want to be doing.
Excellent. And like, you were 15 years teaching. Were you teaching in classes or were you teaching individually?
I was teaching both in classes and individually. I was an English teacher in Asia, in Korea, in Taiwan, and in Japan. And some teachers work for the educational system, in which case most of the time they're in a classroom. But I worked at a school that kind of freelanced me out to various places. So sometimes I worked with one-on-one individuals, sometimes I worked with small groups, and other times I was working in classrooms, like high schools and stuff, and kindergarten. So I taught everybody in any number of group size.
And just like doing that, engaging, especially like when it's kind of adolescence and stuff like that. How do you keep them that they're not distracted?
Well, I tend to have a very, I guess, I don't know what it is about me, but I've always felt good in front of a crowd. I've always felt very outgoing in front of a crowd. So I think it was a kind of energetic thing that I used as part of my personal nature to keep the kids entertained. And it was very, very tiring. I taught at this one kindergarten once a week, fortunately, only once a week. And it was 8 classes, and each class was 15 minutes. And it was just absolute 100% on, high energy, no breaks whatsoever. And it was really exhausting. But the kids, because they see a foreign teacher only once or twice per week, so they're kind of excited already just because I'm there. So I don't really have to keep them engaged based on the kind of a lesson plan, just kind of show up and kind of be myself and go through a lot of teaching techniques. And I learned a lot of techniques from teaching classes that I took on how to keep kids engaged by involving games and stuff, and making sure that the lessons are interesting. But I think a main component of that was just my kind of natural class clownish behavior that I had ever since I was in high school.
And with the different nationalities, you mentioned Japan and Korea and then another one, like, did you notice differences with their learning styles?
Not really that much different. I mean, learning a foreign language and speaking a foreign language in public is kind of an intimidating thing, just like public speaking can be an intimidating thing. So the struggles they had were really kind of the same basic struggles, regardless of the ethnicity or the nationality. It was just a matter of bringing them out of their shell and helping them to become more confident, because in Taiwan, in Korea, and Japan, they study English in school, so they know grammar, they know vocabulary. It's just the speaking of the English that is difficult for them. So in that regard, it was really the same from culture to culture, just trying to get them, to coax them, to lead by example, to get them out of their shell so they can become more confident.
Excellent. And what's your own kind of journey then to getting comfortable speaking, or were you always no problem for you?
I generally have never really had much of a problem speaking in public. I remember when I was in junior high school, I switched schools and I had to give a book report within about a month or two of moving to the new school. And that was intimidating because I was standing up in front of essentially a group of strangers. And so I was giving a book report. It was a new school. It was a new experience. It was a whole different crowd. And that was kind of intimidating. But most of the time, whenever I've had to speak in public, I've always just enjoyed it. In fact, when I was in high school, I worked at a movie theater, and we had the regular busy Friday, Saturday nights, and the people would come buy their tickets. They would wait in line outside the theater. About 20 minutes before the movie would start, they would let them in, and they would make a mad rush to the audience or the auditorium to get their seats. They would make a mad rush to the candy counter to get their snacks. And the manager got the idea that we were maybe missing out on some sales because some of the customers might have wanted to buy some popcorn and drinks and whatnot, but because it was so busy, they might have decided not to. So she wanted to try to take a cart, fill it up with popcorn and candy and cokes, and push it into the auditorium and give them an extra opportunity to buy stuff. And the first person that tried that would just stand at the back of the auditorium with this cart filled with drinks and popcorn and snacks. And nobody was buying it because nobody really understood what they was supposed to do. And so I said, let me try that. And so I went in there, I took this cart and I started pushing it up and down the aisles and just screaming like a crazy pitchman, hey, get your fresh hot popcorn, get your drinks. And I absolutely loved that. And it became a kind of point of pride of mine to try to sell everything out, even though I still got paid the same. And it was just kind of a cool thing that I had discovered. And I was so good at it, they put me outside with this kind of fully functioning popcorn cart with electricity and flowing drinks and everything. And they gave me a bullhorn. And so while people were waiting in line to buy their tickets, I was just screaming through the bullhorn, just making up all these crazy popcorn pitches off the top of my head. And I loved that.
Brilliant, brilliant. No, I love hearing cinema stories because my father worked in the cinema all his life, and so I got the benefits of going in and seeing every movie for nothing. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah. We got weekly passes, and we would, it was a great place to meet girls because you had a whole lot of high school and college kids working in the same environment, and you got free movie passes, so you could meet a girl there, take her on a free date. It's just a fantastic experience.
exactly. And because I believe you've done, because we mentioned prior to recording, we were just talking about the Toastmasters, but I believe you were in Toastmasters as well for a while, yeah.
Yeah, I went through Toastmasters about 20 years ago, back when they had the competent speaker path. They
Yeah,
had
I
10,
actually
10
think that's
speeches.
better, to be honest with you, because I've done both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm actually an active member of 3 groups in my local area, and they have the different paths that you can go through. And so, yeah, I love Toastmasters. I love any opportunity to speak.
Yeah, because that was something that I was doing even with the newer people, because I formed my own club, but I'm no longer a member. But basically, I was using the old manual because it was like 10 speeches and it kind of took you through everything that you needed to do. Whereas the new
Right.
one, it kind of doesn't cover. I think it loses that. And most people, they don't have the manual. They're just printing it off. They're doing it electronically. So they're not benefiting from like we did previously.
Right. Yeah. I also think there's a lot of holes in the new way. And a lot of the speeches they recommend you doing are not really so much public speaking as it's kind of more like management training or something,
Yeah.
which is good, but it still kind of confuses what you're trying to do. I mean, a lot of people join Toastmasters not because they want to become a better manager, but because they want to become a better speaker.
No, exactly. And I mean, I would have seen people coming in and leaving. I don't know, was I involved with it for maybe 5 years, something like that? Like, but I'd see people coming in, and by just going through the 10 speeches in that book, they'd go from like buckling, shaking to competent speakers. But I
Right.
wouldn't see the same progress with somebody actually doing one of the pats.
Right. Yeah, I still recommend to my clients and my students that if you can, if you have the time, if there's a Toastmasters group in your area, you join Toastmasters, as that will benefit you in so many ways.
No,
Even
definitely.
if you never
And
want to give a public speak, it's a great way to just build your confidence.
absolutely. And even the table topics, and just
Yeah, yeah,
thinking on your feet. But I think the best part that most people might even realize is there's an evaluator that's actually, you do your speech and you're getting feedback. And
yes.
that's the most important thing, because sometimes people are kind of doing the circuit, they're building as they go along, but they never get the feedback and they just think they know what way to do it. And when you've
Yeah,
constant
yeah.
feedback, all you're doing is improving the whole time.
Right. Yeah, any kind of self-development, feedback is absolutely critical. Even if you're starting a business, you need to know what sells just as much as you need to know what doesn't sell, because both sides of the positive and negative feedback will steer you towards a more successful future. And if you're not getting feedback, it's like practicing shooting basketball free throws with a blindfold on. You don't know when you miss, you don't know when you make it. You just
I
kind of
think
pretend that you're being
when I play,
successful.
it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, yeah.
So with the, like, I see you do the hypnosis, and I just saw from the LinkedIn a fantastic testimonial of somebody that you have helped. So, like, how did you get into that, and what kind of things have you helped people with?
Well, when I started teaching English, particularly in Japan, to professionals, engineers, salespeople, they had a lot of very advanced questions about English. And so I had to study the grammar of English. And that led me to study grammar and linguistics in general, which led me to the kind of field of NLP. And NLP was kind of reverse engineered from a lot of world class therapists back in the day in the 60s and 50s, when it was kind of starting to become okay to go to therapy, but before the insurance companies took over. And there was these world class therapists that would just help people and solve their problems within a couple of sessions. And these guys kind of reverse engineered the structure of their language and kind of came up with a system to talk to people. And that was just fascinating. So I went to a lot of NLP seminars, and I particularly became fascinated with a character named Milton Erickson, a doctor who essentially invented a kind of conversational hypnosis, kind of a storytelling hypnosis. And patients would come to see him. They would walk into his office. They would say, "Doc, I got this problem." He would say, "Well, tell me the problem." They would tell him their problem. And he would say, "That reminds me of a story." And he would start to tell these very confusing, very convoluted stories that would last like an hour. The patient would leave an hour later. They'd be completely confused about what happened. But then a couple of weeks later, they would find that their problem had just vanished. And so I started to study his technique. I started to study, he luckily wrote a lot of books. And that's how I started to get into the idea of conversational hypnosis and using these structures within communication. And when I started to do that, I realized that one of the blocks of being an effective communicator is not just the language that you use, it's the confidence that you have. And so, in order to teach people how to communicate better, I had to teach them how to be more confident. And that kind of bled over, dovetailed from the teaching that I was doing, because as a teacher in high schools, my job was to not teach them English, but it was to be like a role model on how to speak English with massive outside the box flamboyant confidence. And so I kind of just, it slid from one discipline into the other. And so I got into teaching people how to use communication better, how to use better language patterns, how to understand other people. And when I thought about teaching people how to understand others better, that led me into psychology and evolutionary psychology. And they just kind of exploded into a whole new kind of field of study for me.
Yeah, fascinating. And like, for those that are terrified of getting on stage, which I know a lot of people do, and just like not sure, have from your own journey, but from a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of it comes from the school, because unfortunately a lot of the teachers embarrass them, go around the class. I remember
Yes.
my brain used to
Yes.
stop. They'd be going around the class to either say something, ask a question, or just read, and I just freeze. And then
Yes.
you'd stutter, and then they'd mock you, and then you just hated it. So I was 45 when I actually started going to Toastmasters, and there's a load of people like that. So it's like
Yes.
I keep telling people now at a young age to do it, but what would you tell people, no matter what age they are, when they have that fear?
I would say to start as slowly and easily as you can. I think public speaking is a meta skill. And within this meta skill, there are a lot of smaller micro skills, internal skills, external skills. And what you described is a very, very common human process. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said that all humans are born geniuses. But by the time we go through school, we are de-geniused because we had that experience of wanting to express ourselves, but then we're told no. We want to express ourselves, we're told no. By the time we get out of the school system, we're terrified of expressing ourselves. So I would say learn public speaking, not just to be a public speaker, but to learn to feel comfortable when you express yourself. And that is something that just takes a lot of time. It's just as time consuming and requires as much persistence as someone who's never exercised before and decided they want to become a marathoner. You can't just decide to become a marathoner and go on running. You'll snap all your tendons. So similarly, if you've never really expressed yourself in public confidently before, just go as slow as you possibly can. For some of my clients, that basic first steps is just to go somewhere socially and just sit and just be in a place with other people and just make an occasional eye contact with somebody. And then make eye contact and smile, and make eye contact, smile, and say hi, and just go through these very, very, very basic steps to build up the ability to get up in front of people and express yourself and not pass out from fear.
And have you got kind of warm-up exercise that you'd recommend people to be doing before going on stage?
Yeah, generally speaking, is the first thing you do is just try to make eye contact with people. The first step is to make eye contact with people until they break eye contact first. Do that like maybe once per day. Once you can do it once per day, do that 3 times per day. Once you do it 3 times per day, do it 5 times per day. And just keep doing that until it feels comfortable to make eye contact with somebody, until they look away first. And then once you do that, you move up to the next level. You make eye contact, and while they're holding eye contact, you just kind of nod like that to say, hey, what's up? And just slowly improve, increase how you feel comfortable expressing yourself to others in very teeny tiny micro ways. And you can also go to someplace like Toastmasters and just go there and not participate. Just sit there and imagine that you're participating while you're watching all the other people go up there and giving speeches. Because it's like the opposite of exercise. Exercise will never be preferable to sleeping or relaxing. There'll always be a little bit of a push, but if you be consistent and persistent enough, expressing yourself to others will eventually have its own built-in reward, because humans are social animals. It feels good to say hi to somebody and have them say hi back. It feels good to start a conversation with a stranger. And it feels really good to give a speech in front of a group of people that are not going to throw rocks at you. And once you kind of get that, feeling, that drug, then there's really no turning back. And so I would say the most important thing is to be as patient and persistent in your forward progression as you possibly can.
And when like you're coaching people, then like a lot of the times, I mean, I always found it easy writing a speech, but I came across a lot of people and they just struggle with that. Have you tips for people on recommendations for whether you, even if it's a Toastmaster short speech or whatever it would be?
When someone sits down to write a speech, they think of what they're saying in terms of telling it to a group of people. And from a psychological standpoint, when you stand up in front of a group of people, you have this presupposition of authority. And the fear is that when you give a speech and you're presupposing you're the authority figure because you're standing in front of the group, you have to have a very, very important mind or life-changing message. And so I would recommend that people forget about the part that you're giving a speech. Just come up with an idea that you'd like to tell a friend to, and get it out of your mind that this is going to be a speech. And just talk about something interesting that happened to you. The other day when I was a kid, this happened, and what I learned was this behavior. And if you could do that, you'll learn the same thing. It's really a matter of not the structure of the speech itself, but to get yourself out of the imagination that you're stepping into some authority position and you're going to deliver some life-changing message, that it has to be a super important speech. I would just say write whatever and just tell a story about what happened to you, or talk about something that happened, or something that you learned and you want to teach to somebody else.
So 100 books, it seems. I mean, I've had one person on, he did 84, and I was kind of in awe of that, but you've over 100. So what kind of possessed you to kind of get into it? And then you might talk on, I see, like, I was able to find it just through your profile, a lot of them hypnosis, there's a load of different things, but kind of, you might touch on them. What kind of, obviously not all of them, but just on a few of them.
Well, as far as writing 100 books, I got into the habit of just writing for the same time period each day. And this was something I learned way, way back when before I wrote any books, and I had dreams of becoming a novelist. And the idea was, instead of committing yourself to writing a certain number of words per day, commit yourself to writing a certain time per day and just write whatever. And so I got into the habit, and that became part of my daily routine. And so for the 10, 15 years I was teaching English in Asia, I would get up really, really early. I would spend 2, 3 hours at home before leaving for work. And during that 2, 3 hours at home, I would just write at a regular pace. And I would have a schedule of when I would release new products. And the products included books and these listening programs, these subliminal listening programs. So it was really kind of a repeatable daily routine that just kept producing the amount of books. They have these characters in the movies that write fiction, at least, that are kind of wandering around looking for their muse, trying to figure out what inspiration to catch them, and they're going to coffee shops with their laptops and trying to write. But every single day, I just ground out this daily writing. And when I was writing fiction, I've written maybe 80 nonfiction books and maybe 30 or 40 fiction books. But when I was writing fiction, I spent a year and a half with this weekly routine where I would write a novel once per week, and then send it off to the editor. And I had a routine, a process. And one of the things, this is going to sound really strange, but one of the things I did was I created a kind of self hypnosis, so that when I was writing fiction, I didn't really imagine that I was trying to come up with what's happening in the story. I imagined that I was sitting at my keyboard, and when I was watching the words come out on the screen, I imagined I was watching a drama unfold on Netflix, and it had nothing to do with me. And that kind of helped me get my own self out of the equation and just kind of let it flow naturally. And that is how I wrote a lot of material. I was writing maybe 4 or 5 thousand words per day during that process, during those years, that year and a half. So it's just a matter of
Incredible.
doing the same thing every day. If you do the same thing every day, you'll just get better and better at doing those same things every day. And if those same things you're doing every day are producing something that other people will enjoy, you'll just begin making better and better stuff that other people will enjoy every day.
And are you doing audiobooks as well?
I've done a few audiobooks. I've taken a few of my books and turned them into audiobooks, but that's, for me, is a kind of a time-consuming process. As far as producing words, I can produce words a lot better if I'm typing than if I'm speaking. So for me, as an entrepreneur, from an entrepreneurial mindset, it's just more time efficient for me to produce a lot of written books instead of audiobooks. But I have turned probably a few of them into audiobooks. Not necessarily pure audiobooks, but kind of comprehensive training programs that come with audiobook versions of my written books, along with a lot of subliminal programming and hypnosis to help internalize the ideas that are presented inside the book.
Excellent. With the subliminal programming, because unfortunately, the powers that be kind of know this as well, and it's in televisions and stuff like that. How powerful is it when it's used in the wrong way?
Actually, I personally believe, this is going to be a contrary opinion, but I personally believe it's not nearly as powerful as people think it is. That's when you're talking about specifically subliminal programming. Now, there is a lot of mind control techniques that the powers that be are using, but subliminal programming is just one kind of micro part of that. And what I produce is not technically subliminal programming. It's just that the label subliminals is a very identifiable label. What I produce is sounds that you can actually hear. It's just a lot of people talking at once. So it kind of would be like, or the effect I'm trying to create would be, if you were to sit in a comfortable room and 3 or 4 people would stand around you in a circle, and they would just keep repeating positive things about you, and you were just kind of relax and let those kind of statements soak into your brain, that would be a very pleasant experience. And that's kind of what I create with our subliminals. But technically, subliminals are things that come in under our awareness. And the only real study that they've done on subliminals are the famous movie experiment back in the 50s, where they flashed messages on the screen to buy more popcorn and buy more Coke. And that did increase sales by a certain percentage. But whether or not that would work in another context, I think is questionable. Like if you were sitting in the doctor's office watching TV and they flash subliminal messages to eat more broccoli, it probably wouldn't make you go home and eat more broccoli. Because people are in a movie theater and they're smelling the popcorn, and they've probably been to a movie theater before. They've probably drank Coke in a movie theater before. So when they see a message that says buy popcorn, drink Coke, it's something they've already done. And it's in the context they've already done it. So it's a real easy kind of sale, so to speak, to get people to buy popcorn in a movie theater. But as far as mind control from the government or from advertisers, that's absolutely powerful. And there's a lot of techniques that go far beyond subliminal programming. In fact, one of the bigwig original OG mass mind control experts is a guy named Bernays, who was the cousin of Sigmund Freud back in the 50s. And he kind of came up with the whole idea of mass market advertising. And as soon as they invented TV, and as soon as the masses had TV, that was just a fantastic transmission mechanism to get people to buy stuff.
And when you're training then, because sometimes people say you can learn when you're asleep, others say no, it's not possible. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of NLP seminars are taught under the not so subtle supposition that you can learn passively, or you can unconsciously model people passively. They have done studies. The only study I know of is that if you try to learn in your sleep, the best it can do is only enhance what you've already learned in a traditional way. Like they took two groups of people, and one group studied a whole bunch of vocabulary words in a foreign language. The other people didn't study the vocabulary words, and they both listened to the vocabulary words repeated while they slept. And the group that studied them before had a little bit better memory, while the people that never studied them, they didn't pick up any of the vocabulary words. So the idea is very, very compelling that we can just flip on a tape, go to sleep, and wake up like in the Matrix and download the information into our brains. But the studies that have been done on this don't really show it does anything other than augment a more traditional studying technique.
And with the hypnosis, because we've all seen this, on stage you see people and they're just sleep, do this, do that. Right. Are you totally conscious of that, or how is it? Because I mean, just from things that I've seen, say, they were telling people in the audience, close your hands, and is it that you're easily susceptible to these things? So the people that couldn't open their hands, they brought them up and they do go through the thing, or what way does it work?
I personally believe that most of that stage hypnosis is completely voluntary, and the person is just making the decision to do whatever the guy tells them to do. They're not losing their free will. And if you understand the influence triggers discovered or defined by Dr. Robert Cialdini, there's 7 basic triggers of influence. That's authority, social proof, commitment and consistency, scarcity, comparison and contrast, liking, and reciprocity. And a lot of these are leveraged during a hypnosis show. So when you first buy a ticket to a hypnosis show, you're validating that you believe in hypnosis. And then the hypnotist looks at the audience and says, who wants to be hypnotized? And some people raise their hand. So that's the second step in validating that you want to be hypnotized. That's a public statement that you want to be hypnotized. And once we make a public statement, it's much harder for us to kind of walk that statement back. And then when you get up on stage, you're doing what the hypnotist tells you to do. And the more you're compliant, the more fun of an experience it will be. The more you're kind of a star on stage by doing goofy things. And if you were to go to a party a couple of weeks later and talk about your experience being hypnotized, the more compliant you are, the more voluntarily compliant you are on stage during the hypnosis session, the better of a story you'll be able to tell to your friends at the party. So there's a lot of reasons that kind of coalesce together to make people do those crazy things on stage, but it's mostly all voluntary. In fact, if you were to go to a whole bunch of stage hypnotist shows and copy all the language the hypnotist uses and then try that language on random people on the street, it wouldn't have nearly the same effect. So it's not really the words of the hypnotist, it's more of the hypnotist's confidence, it's his authority, it's the fact that he's sorting the audience for the people that are the most likely to comply with his suggestions on stage. It's kind of like psychics when they pretend to be psychic and they look at the room with these, their peripheral vision. They say someone here has a relative named Doug, and they kind of out of the corner of their eye they see a face light up. Yes, Doug, I just got a hit on you. And oh my gosh, yeah. How did you know that? It's kind of the same thing. The hypnotist looks at the audience and says, now, when I say clasp your hands, you'll clasp your hands. And he notices the ones that are the most clasping their hands, the strongest. And those are the people he calls up on stage. So in a sense, the pre-hypnotist example of the audience is kind of a sorting mechanism to select the most likely obedient people to be hypnotized on stage. It's a huge kind of production with a lot of variables. But it's not like in the movies where you snap your fingers and just make people do things.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I love that explanation. So your company then, so what exactly are you doing with the company?
Well, I've been building products. We've been making products for the past 15 years. And recently I've stopped the product production process because I've essentially ran out of ideas around which to build new products. I mean, that's what happens when you write 80 books. You kind of run out of ideas. And so I'm kind of transitioning into a more of a marketing of our products and to expand from online sales into live workshops and live coaching. And coaching is something we've recently started, and so far it's been very, very successful. And so we're kind of transitioning to how specifically we provide these ideas to people to help them do better in their lives.
And with the kind of craziness in the last 3 years, having to kind of transition into kind of Zoom meetings and stuff like that, did you have to do much, and how do you connect? Because I mean, personally, I was doing competitions and different things, and it was so weird because you couldn't see nobody, and it was I didn't enjoy it. But I know some loved it because of lack, they didn't have to travel, live out of a suitcase and things like that. But just what was your journey?
Actually, I was a little bit worried when COVID hit. I had all these horrible ideas of Mad Max and zombie apocalypses and The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, but none of that panned out. And it didn't really affect my business that much because I had just come back from Asia when COVID hit. And during Asia, I was still building my business, but I was necessarily doing it online. And so when I came back, I was going to transition into having live seminars, but COVID really all it did was set me back a couple of years. But it did, like you said, it fundamentally transformed how people think of interacting with other people. Because now, I mean, before COVID, if someone was going to interact with somebody, doing it through a Zoom would seem kind of weird. But now, since everyone's been forced to do it through a Zoom, we've kind of gotten lazy and nobody really wants to leave their house anymore. So it's definitely impacted society a lot. It just didn't really have that much of an impact on me yet.
With, I suppose, everything at the moment for the last 3 years is crazy. There's just so many different things, and everyone has their own kind of belief system. And then, but what I've noticed is sometimes people kind of realize they were wrong, but they will never admitting it. And I know you kind of touch on things like that. I class it like letting go of the ego. That's just kind of like to be able to. So you might touch on that because I know that's something that you talk about.
Yeah, that's one of Cialdini's laws of influence, the commitment and consistency. And an example he lists in his book are these end of the world doomsday cults. They join this cult, the world's going to end next Tuesday. They quit their jobs, they sell all their stuff, they tell all their friends because they really believe the world's going to end, but then the world doesn't end. And the question is, why do they still belong to that cult when they've been so obviously wrong? And the reason is because they've made so many public statements to this cult. That subconscious, emotional, instinctive connection is stronger than the logic that says your cult was totally wrong. And so they almost double down to what they said. And they've done studies on jury trials, and jury trials where they vote guilty or not guilty, and they say their vote out loud. Those take twice as long compared to the ones where they vote in secret and they don't tell anybody their vote. So when people admit to a belief publicly, it's just an instinctively hard thing to do to walk that back. In fact, most people won't ever change their beliefs until something really, really bad happens to them. And it's fairly obvious that that bad thing is because of their beliefs. That's really the only time people will walk stuff back. Like if you look at in the States, you have Republicans and Democrats. And the only real time someone will shift from one party to the other is because something terrible happens, something life changing happens, which forces them to relook at their beliefs. But absent that external bad thing in their life to force us to re examine our beliefs, it's really hard for most people to just voluntarily, without any reason, just decide to change what we believe. That's a function of human nature, which is a problem, as you mentioned before. It's getting more and more problem today, especially in the States, because in the States, a lot of people are starting to polls and surveys say that a lot of people are saying that the Constitution is no longer relevant. What's relevant is violence against the other team. I mean, there's so much hatred between the political ideologies and belief systems that I'm kind of worried about the future.
And like, because I think most of the people that are fighting and whatever, they have their belief system. Not necessarily it's correct, but everybody has their own belief system based on their upbringing and external forces that have created that. But they tend to push their agenda, whether they're right or not, on the other person. But the reality is, no one's going to change their mind until they believe in it themselves and do their own kind of, like, my strategy, because one of the podcasts is kind of exposing a lot of stuff, but it's like never attacking somebody. I just kind of put it out there, and sometimes I just kind of mention something, say the fluoride in the water or something like that, and just kind of little things, but without kind of going, oh, you can't do this. And just plenty of times people will come on, they'll have a totally different belief system, but I never attack them or just go, because it never changes that. But unfortunately, 90% of the population today, they believe by just having an argument, they're going to make them change. And if anything, it's like a magnet. They're just pushing them in the opposite direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the more you argue with somebody, the more they'll dig into their beliefs. And that's even worse today because of social media, because before social media, you had to find a group that supported your beliefs. But no matter what kind of crazy beliefs you have, you can find a reference group online that will support that belief. And that will leverage another Cialdini influence trigger called social proof. If you can socially proof your belief, no matter how crazy it is, with people online, that makes it that much harder for that person to ever change their beliefs. In fact, one of my books I wrote is called the Guru Trap, which talks about that. If you follow some guru, you have some strong beliefs, the guru has a strong enough following, you get connected to that following, you're really stuck in there unless something really, really bad happens that forces you to re-examine why you're there in the first place. And it's just unfortunately a function of human nature. I mean, you theoretically could use the Socratic method and just ask people questions and patiently and calmly draw out their beliefs and help them through their own answers to those questions, show them the contradictions in their beliefs. But that requires a willing partner who's willing to do that. And so even that's not possible today for a lot of people.
Because I mean,
unfortunately.
I understand, and sometimes you just get frustrated because then they say things that you say, that there's no way that you could believe that. And the minute you say something like that, or just even your thought process, they can even read up on the energy levels, and it doesn't work. And I think that's society today. Whether Democrat, Republican, and it's in every single situation. I think we just have to learn to be loving and patient and just accept people for what they are and not attack them. And if someone's attacking you, not to take it in as well. You have to, build up your resilience that you don't accept their aggression towards you.
Right. One of the greatest pieces of advice I've heard, I think, comes from the ancient Stoics, who said that if you want to change the world, then you have to behave the way you wish other people would behave. If everybody did that, all the problems would stop.
So just finally, because you 100 books, but also with your business and everything. And I always love asking people their kind of the social media, because it's a minefield. It wrecks my head, but I'd love to know your thoughts, what you feel has served you and what you don't really think is any benefit.
Well, I have used social media a little bit, but from a pure entrepreneurial business standpoint, it hasn't really generated a lot of sales. And so as far as growing my business, the most steady way I've grown my business is on my website, and I promote my website, and my website gets visitors, and a certain percentage of them sign up for my email list. And most of the stuff I sell to my email list. I've put stuff on social media just to put it out there, but it hasn't really generated nearly as much bang for my buck, so to speak, as growing my email list. So I recognize social media exists. I know that some people make a lot of money on social media, but that's not really something that I've been focused on. Maybe because I've had bad experience in the past with various social media platforms. I've had experiences where I spend a lot of time, a year or two, building a presence on one particular social media platform. That presence generates a lot of income or a lot of business, but then for some reason, the social media company decides to kick me off. And that is very, very dangerous from a business standpoint. When you build up parts of your business that will generate in sales, you don't want to have those other entities that are generating sales be in control of somebody else. That's a very, very unwise business strategy. So for that reason, I don't really put too much effort in social media, because I realize that that entity, that social media presence, could easily be taken away, and that's something that's completely out of my control.
I think that's
As far as my
fantastic
personal
advice.
life, I don't. As far as my personal life, I don't really spend any time on social media other than when I'm bored and I want something to do and I watch a few silly videos on TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, because like, I mean, speaking of TikTok, I started putting some of the videos out on that, and some were getting like, one got 13,000 views, and I was like, okay, this is great. The next I get a community warning, I get 9. So I just said, I'm not putting more energy into that.
Yeah, right,
Yesterday,
right,
my
right.
Awakening channel, the YouTube was just, I got strikes removed. Yesterday, I have somebody that helps me with my crypto, and she said, did you remove me? And it's gone. Not even a warning, just disappears. So it's like,
Wow.
yeah, and it's like, so what you have said, and I think people forget that everyone is trying to be on everything. They're trying to be on Instagram, they're trying to be on Twitter.
Yeah.
Most of them are as negative as you get. You go into Twitter now, and I think it's worse than CNN. So, like, the best thing is have your own channel, have your email list, do a decent
Yes.
newsletter, don't bombard them. And as you say,
Yes.
you've realized you get more conversion rate, and I think it's the best advice you could tell people.
Mm. Yeah,
So
it's
listen,
amazing how many people. When I was a kid, the thing was to get on TV one day for doing something, because that was all we had. We had TV that had like 3 or 4 channels. That was it. So your dream to be famous was to get on TV, which means you had to do something spectacular. But now everybody's dream is to be famous on YouTube or TikTok.
exactly. Unfortunately, yeah. But so listen, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. You might let people know, George, where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. The main page where we have listed all of our resources is mindpersuasion.com/start. Mind persuasion, one word, mindpersuasion.com/start. And that's got all of our products, all of our contact information, all the information about our coaching, everything you would want.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'll make sure I'll include both the audio and the video. Thank you very much, George.
All right. Thank you, Roy. Great conversation.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find other episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Until next week, take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends. And you'll find all my shows with the QR code or bio.link/podcaster, as well as my podcast coaching. And I'd like to thank my sponsor, DanielPacker.com, helping people with anxiety, stress, and addictions. He's got a 90% success rate, and you only pay if you're successful. Also, if you'd like to go on a podcasting tour, I can help you do that. And if you're interested in sponsorship, you can contact me on my bio.link/podcaster. Until next week, take care.